In this section, I'll be applying some of what I learned 15 to 20 years ago while doing research for a PhD. I was using artificial neural networks, that's ANS for short, and as a result got insights into how we learn with our biological neural networks, our brains. I also learned about some intrinsic vulnerabilities of our wonderful brains, specifically regarding the role of the unconscious mind. Artificial neural networks, ANS, have been described as crude mimicry of the brain. They operate differently to computers. Why this matters regarding racism will soon unfold, but first let's compare them. Computers are programmed, and so they're rule-based. They process information linearly. Everything is broken down into binary code, ones and zeros, and then processed one bit of information at a time. They have address book type memories, like a lookup table. If you want the information, then you need to go to the correct page or pages to find it. ANS, on the other hand, are trained by example and repetition, with feedback to correct for errors or affirm reality and truths. They're like us. The more we get told something, the better a chance we'll have of learning it. They're pattern-based and holistic. They take in the whole picture, so to speak, rather than break it down into binary code to be processed linearly. They have associative memories. You access information through what is associated with it, not by page numbers. I'll give an example of this in a minute, which will help to clarify everything. The result is that computers are fault intolerant. They produce error messages or no output if we don't present data in the correct manner. They're not flexible, they're fixed. They must be updated, patched, or reprogrammed. ANS, on the other hand, are fault tolerant. They produce output from data that is incomplete, inconsistent, inexact, noisy, contradictory, and so on. They make a best estimate. They generalize from the pattern, the whole picture. They're flexible, they adapt, evolve, they deal with new information, they learn as they go. ANS have these properties by design. They mimic the brain to make fast analytical and predictive tools, but they do have vulnerabilities. Here's a short apocryphal story that's told to everyone who studies ANS. It ties together what I've sketched out earlier on. The aim of the story is to show their vulnerabilities. During the First Gulf War, the US Air Force wanted an automatic way to distinguish between friendly and enemy tanks. They collected many photographs of both, removed a small number for testing purposes, and then used the bulk to train their AN. The training involved showing the AN each tank image in turn. The AN sought the pattern of information that distinguished friend from foe. It could have been markings, proportions, and location of components, combinations, and so on. When a friend-foe guess had been made, the AN looked up the correct identity. The difference between its guess and the reality was calculated, and this was fed back, and adjustments were made to algorithms. The AN then moved on to the next image. The process was repeated, seeking a general pattern that always enables a correct friend or foe assignment. The AN went through all the images many thousands of times in order to achieve this. When training was completed, they tested the AN and it scored perfectly. However, when used in combat, they had many friendly fire incidents. On re-examining the collected photos, they found that all the enemy tank images were taken on cloudy days, and all the friendly taken on sunny days. The background information was the dominant pattern, and it happened to fit the training requirement. The AN was an unintended weather predictor. It was making friend or foe predictions based on weather associations. Clearly then, ANs find patterns where patterns exist. So training must be intelligently designed so as to avoid predictions based on anomalous or irrelevant patterns and associations. This is also true of our biological neural networks, our brains. They are pattern recognition devices too. The weather is irrelevant in the friend or foe tank example. It's a result of sloppy data collection and oversight. The consequence was obvious, and so corrective action was taken. Enter the problem with stereotyping. Anomalous or irrelevant associations and patterns based on race. They're perpetuated in the media and the education system. I'll say more on this in part 5. Repeated often enough, and they are, our brains absorb them and learn, despite having no foundation in reality. Part 1 demonstrated how obvious this is. Yet corrective action is woefully lacking. So, stereotypes persist. Our biological neural networks absorb the example and repetition training, they generalize, and conditioning happens. Furthermore, it's very easy to trigger these stereotypes. There are also acceptable restricted roles that are stereotypes, funneling black people into sports, entertainment, like music, dance and acting, preacher roles, and civil rights activism, and so on. But it's not just stereotypes that are important in pattern recognition devices like our brains. Omissions are also important. Think of music, which is complex patterns. It's not only sounds that matter, it's also the silence between the sounds. Omissions leave stereotypes unchallenged, and so become associations or patterns of inability or unsuitability. The voids matter. We know the value of role models, whether they're textbook or real life, and the consequences of their absence. There's much more to omissions than meets the eye, and I'll give examples in the next section. But first I need to develop this one a little more. What we'll see in part 5 is that the media does most negative stereotyping. The education system is full of omissions, and that their roles are not exclusive. There is crossover. Stereotyping and omissions affect us all. It doesn't matter what we believe, think, or know, and this is important because the patterns, associations, and omissions escape us. We don't notice them. The reason why harks back to an earlier slide in this film, the one that explains what critical race theory is. Specifically, CRT's aim to expose how racial inequality is maintained through structures and assumptions that appear normal and unremarkable. For those who doubt just how important our subconscious or unconscious mind is, here are some examples. All of them are important to the optimal functioning of our conscious mind, but we rarely consider them. Walking. This is a complex balancing act using multiple sensory inputs. It requires in-the-moment decisions based on feedback. Subconscious control enables us to do other things while we walk, because we can do it without thinking. Face recognition. The word recognition says it all. We're not working it out. It's a pattern thing. It's instant. The cocktail party effect. This is tuning into a conversation in a noisy room. We use pitch, accent, modulation, vocabulary, etc., all of which are patterns in themselves. Language and music. Recognizing tunes, even from a few notes, distinguishing covers from originals, recognizing styles in previously unheard music, enabling us to predict the band. Here's a list of other examples of day-to-day subconsciously driven behaviors. These are not exclusively unaware things. Sometimes these things will happen through self-aware, conscious decision-making, but they also abound through unaware routes informed by the conditioned subconscious mind. So, for example, people of color will routinely experience the following: people crossing the street to avoid them, people clutching bags tight or digging hands into wallet pockets as they pass, being followed by store detectives, being refused entry to clubs and service in pubs, pat-downs, ID checks when they make a purchase, taxis and buses not stopping for them, being invisible, overlooked in a queue. There's many more examples, and they all have a white privilege flip side. So what's going on with these reactions that are sometimes called acts of microaggression? These are reactions to the perception of threat, danger, or dishonesty. Things learned through example and repetition, mainly via the media. Reactions to stereotyping resulting in conditioning. I believe it's an inappropriate activation of the fight or flight mechanism. It's involuntary, unintended, unaware, subconscious. Some people may be aware of their reactions, but unaware of the cause. They'll insist their raised sense of fear or suspicion was due to something rational. They'll likely deny even the possibility that their action was due to conditioning. Remember the evidence from part 1? The institutional outcomes? Police and customs with stop and search. Judges and juries with sentences. Mental health professionals. Employers and teachers. This is mostly behavior that is unintended, unaware, conditioned. It's about subconscious patterns and associations. They don't know what they're doing, and they can't help it while they're unaware. Raising awareness is essential.